Good evening, everyone. Thank you, students. Welcome to a very, very special night for the University of Tampa. My name is Erika Dawson, and I'm extremely fortunate to be the director of our low residency MFA in Creative Writing program. Indeed. Indeed. Our Master of Fine Arts program was established in January 2012, and I can't actually believe that was 14 residencies ago. Since then, every June and January, our students have come from all over the country, and even as far as Kenya and Malaysia, for 10 days of intensive study with some of the most talented faculty members and writers in the world. After their 10 days on campus, the students return home and work independently with their assigned mentor on a plan of study tailored to that particular student's projects and goals. Our illustrious alumni, many of whom are in attendance tonight, have gone on to publish novels, memoirs, essay collections, and collections of poetry, on to teaching positions at colleges and universities, editorships, and jobs with publishing companies. And many who choose not to pursue writing or teaching as a profession have further developed their love of learning and their passion for art. So if you will, allow me a solid 10 seconds for the sales pitch. If you're interested in our MFA program, please do stop by the table in the lobby where members of our admissions department will be thrilled to tell you more about our vibrant program and give you further information. Now ends the pitch. Back to the real business at hand. Before I introduce you to the woman that we're all here to see, I want to offer a special welcome to the members of our trustee board and members of the College of Arts and Letters Advisory Board in attendance tonight, and of course, the Dean of the College, Dr. David Goudlunas. I would also like to thank UT's president, Dr. Ronald Vaughn, and his wife, Renee, for their support. And also, I would like to thank all of you who I've never met from the larger St. Pete and Tampa community for joining us tonight for this memorable and momentous occasion. Thank you for coming. You don't have to clap after everything that I say. I like it, though, so I'll take it. But mostly, I have to thank our guest of honor tonight, United States Poet Laureate, Tracy K. Smith. That deserves applause. Yes, yes. As many of you know and have told her in the last hour or so, Tracy was originally scheduled to visit during our January residency earlier this year, but the bomb cyclone wasn't going to have it. She sat in the airport for hours, attempting to get on flight after flight, all of which were canceled, of course, due to the storm. But she generously made room in her very tight schedule to visit us now in June for what I counted as roughly 18 and a half hours. Thank you so much for your generosity, Tracy. Tracy was appointed Poet Laureate of the United States in 2017 and reappointed earlier this year. Yeah. Those of you who know me know I like a feisty crowd, so feel free to let the spirit move you. Before the laurels, she already held a prominent position in our country's literary world. Her first 3 collections of poetry were all award-winning and critically acclaimed. Her third collection, Life on Mars, which was life-altering for me, won the 2012 Pulitzer Prize. From there, she has published the critically acclaimed memoir, Ordinary Light, and her newest collection of poetry, Wade in the Water, released earlier this year by Grey Wolf Press. While Life on Mars meditates on cultural iconography and the intimacies of the immediate family, Wade in the Water centers around our country's collective history. As the title, borrowed from a Negro spiritual, suggests, this most necessary book gives voice to the always has been and still is marginalized population of African Americans. This collection includes testimonies from African Americans enlisted in the Civil War, the stories of slaves, and in a poem that actually made me tremble, titled Declaration, brilliantly composed of fragments of the Declaration of Independence. Tracy offers us a measured, almost calm, yet completely scathing commentary on our country's continuous harassment and oppression, reminding us that not nearly enough has changed since America's inception. Poets frequently speak about the political poem and the ways in which it is often a text solely written for poets, rather than a text for the much more complex readership of the world. Tracy has dedicated herself and her time to bringing art, both her own and that of others, to individuals all across the country, whether it's in a small Georgia town with a single stoplight or in the spotlights of a Manhattan theater. We are extremely lucky to have her dedication, her service, and her talents. It is a thrill and a fangirl moment for me to have her here tonight in our beautiful, historic city. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Tracy K. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been made to feel so welcome in the last hour and only a little guilty for having not made it here in January. But I'm really thrilled to be here and to be in what feels like such a vibrant and joyful and serious and belief-filled art-making community. So thanks for welcoming me. I'm going to just pick up from Erika's beautiful introduction and dive into some of the poems that are thinking about history. My motivation in looking back to these voices from what used to feel like so long ago has been to hear something that might be newly useful as we continue to struggle over the knot that has to do with our inability to deal with race. So I'll start with Declaration. He has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people. He has plundered our, ravaged our, destroyed the lives of our, taking away our, abolishing our most valuable, and altering fundamentally the forms of our. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here, taken captive on the high seas to bear. I had been working on what was going to be sort of a sequence poem that was considering Thomas Jefferson. I had been invited to produce a poem for an anthology called Monticello in Mind, of poets thinking about Jefferson in some way. And I gave a sonnet at that time, and I knew it was wrong. I knew that my ear knew that there was something wrong in the closure of that poem, but I didn't know how to fix it. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to come back and make good on this poem. And maybe I can do that by adding many more sections. And I got to a point where I had looked at some of Jefferson's correspondence with his daughter and found some what felt like interesting statements within that. And then I said, well, let me just look at the Declaration of Independence. And suddenly it took over. I feel like it just started speaking in this voice that felt so so present and so relevant to so much that goes on in the news, and the rest of the poem just kind of disappeared. It's exciting when that happens. We always talk about it, right? We say in workshop, your poem is really kind of wanting to go in this other direction. And then sometimes you really feel your poem telling you, let me do this, let me drive. And that's a good feeling. This is a poem that, so there are a lot of poems in Wade in the Water that derive from documents. There are a lot of found poems, which is not something I've really done a lot of. One source is a history of the Charles Colcock Jones family called Dwelling Place, a plantation epic. It's written by historian and theologian Erskine Clark. And in that, he does a really thorough job of telling the very well-documented story of the Joneses, who were a slave-owning family. Charles Colcock Jones was a Presbyterian minister who, for a brief period in his youth, toyed with the idea of becoming an abolitionist, ultimately changed his mind and went back to, the family business, if you will. And Clark also does a lot of work to try and construct the story of those who were enslaved to the Joneses. There's not a lot of documentation, but I feel like his scholarship is a real act of listening. And so what I've done with this poem is take letters that the Jones family wrote amongst themselves about how to deal with a family of people who were enslaved to them who were causing trouble, making it difficult for them to maintain order. I wanted to hear underneath or within these voices the voice of Patience and the voice of Phoebe, two members of that family. So that's what this poem is. It's a found poem that's also what I felt like a matter of dowsing, searching for these other voices to rise to the surface and tell a counter story. It opens with a quote from a letter from Mary Jones to her cousin Elizabeth Maxwell. The poem is called The Greatest Personal Privation. The greatest personal privation I have had to endure has been the want of either Patience or Phoebe. Tell them I am never, if life is spared us, to be without both of them again. And that was written in 1849. It is a painful and harassing business belonging to her. We have had trouble enough, have no comfort or confidence in them, and they appear unhappy themselves, no doubt from the trouble they have occasioned. They could dispose of the whole family without consulting us, father, mother, every good cook, washer, and seamstress subject to sale. I believe good shall be glad if we may have hope of the loss of trouble. I remain in glad conscience, at peace with God and the world. I have prayed for those people many, many, very many times. Much as I should miss Mother, I've had trouble enough and wish no more to be only waiting to be sent home in peace with God. In every probability, we may yet discover the whole country will not come back from the sale of parent and child. So far as I can see, the loss is great and increasing. I know they have desired we should not know what was for our own good, but we cannot be all the cause of all that has been done. We wish to act. We may yet, but we have to learn what their character and moral conduct will present. We have it in contemplation to wait and see. If good, we shall be glad. If evil, then we must meet evil as best we can. Father, mother, son, daughter, man. And if that family is sold, please We cannot. Please, we have got to. Please, the children, mother and father and husband and all of you, all. I have no more. How soon and unexpectedly cut off. Many, many, very many times. The poem that got me started thinking about documents and voices from this time period was the result of an invitation. And I'd been working on prose for many years, and I felt eager to accept an invitation to write a poem, just hoping to, exercise those muscles. And there was a project commemorating the 150th anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War. And so I said, what do I want to say about that conflict? What do I want to learn? And I realized that the set of voices I was most interested in hearing were those of African Americans who fought during the Civil War. And I found two amazing books that just cataloged letters that soldiers and their family members had written back and forth and to Abraham Lincoln. And then another book that had hundreds of testimonies that veterans, their widows, and their descendants had given after the war in an attempt to claim pensions. But for those who were enslaved, they didn't get birth certificates or marriage licenses or statements attesting to their identity if they changed their names after emancipation. So a great many of these soldiers who had served the country were denied pensions. I found just that trail of those stories so powerful in and of themselves, with the voices making their own appeals, that my poem became a matter merely of curation. I'm just organizing these other voices into what I hope becomes a very compelling chorus. I'm going to read you two sections of this poem, which is called I Will Tell You the Truth About This. I will tell you all about it. Excellent Sir, my son went in the 54th Regiment. Sir, my husband, who is in Company K, 22nd Regiment, U.S. Colored Troops, and now in the Macon Hospital at Portsmouth with a wound in his arm, has not received any pay since last May, and then only $13. Sir, we, the members of Company D of the 55th Massachusetts Volunteers, call the attention of Your Excellency to our case. For instant, look and see that we never was freed yet, run right out of slavery, into soldiery, and we hadn't nothing at all, and our wives and mother, most all of them is a perishing all about, and we all are perishing ourself. I am willing to be a soldier and serve my time faithful like a man, but I think it is hard to be put off in such doggish manner as that. Will you see that the colored men fighting now are fairly treated? You ought to do this, and do it at once, not let the thing run along. Meet it quickly and manfully. We poor oppressed ones appeal to you and ask fair play. So please, if you can do any good for us, do it in the name of God. Excuse my boldness, but please, your reply will settle the matter and will be appreciated by a colored man who is willing to sacrifice his son in the cause of freedom and humanity. I have nothing more to say, hoping that you will lend a listening ear to an humble soldier. I will close. Yours for Christ's sake. I shall have to send this without a stamp, for I hain't money enough to buy a stamp. I am 60-odd years of age. I am 62 years of age next month. I am about 65 years of age. I reckon I am about 67 years old. I'm about 68 years of age. I am on the rise of 80 years of age. I am 89 years old. I am 94 years of age. I don't know my exact age. I am the claimant in this case. I have testified before you 2 different times before. I filed my claim, I think, first about 12 years ago. I am now an applicant for a pension because I understand that all soldiers are entitled to a pension. I claim pension under the general law on account of disease of eyes as a result of smallpox contracted in service. The varicose veins came on both my legs soon after the war, and the sores were there when I first put in my claim. I claim pension for rheumatism and got my toe broke, and I was struck in the side with the breech of a gun, breaking my ribs. I was a man stout and healthy, over 27 years of age when I enlisted. When I enlisted, I had a little mustache and some chin whiskers. I was a green boy right off the farm and did just what I was told to do. When I went to enlist, the recruiting officer said to me, "Your name is John Wilson." I said, "No, my name is Robert Harrison," but he put me down as John Wilson. I was known while in service by that name. I cannot read nor write, and I do not know how my name was spelled when I enlisted, nor do I know how it is spelled now. I always signed my name while in the Army by making my mark. I know my name by sound. My mother said, after my discharge, that the reason the officer put my name down as John Wilson was he could draw my bounty. I am the son of Solomon and Lucinda Sibley. I am the only living child of Dennis Campbell. My father was George Jordan, and my mother was Millie Jordan. My mother told me that John Barnett was my father. My mother was Mary Eliza Jackson, and my father Reuben Jackson. My name on the roll was Frank Nunn. No, sir, it was not Frank Nern. My full name is Dick Lewis Barnett. I am the applicant for pension on account of having served under the name Lewis Smith, which was the name I wore before the days of slavery were over. My correct name is Hiram Kirkland. Some persons call me Harry, and others call me Henry, but neither is my correct name. This is a ghazal that accompanied an exhibition of new drawings by Kara Walker. The sky is dry, pitiless white. The wide rows stretch on into death. Like famished birds, my hands strip each stalk of its stolen crop. Our name. History is a ship forever setting sail. On either shore, mountains of men, oceans of bone, an engine whose teeth shred all that is not our name. Can you imagine what will sound from us, what we'll rend and claim when we find ourselves alone with all we've ever sought, our name? Or perhaps what we seek lives outside of speech, like a tribe of goats on a mountain above a lake, whose hooves nick away at rock. Our name is blown from tree to tree, scattered by the breeze. Who am I to say what in that marriage is lost? For all I know, the grass has caught our name. Having risen from moan to growl, growl to a hound's low bray, the voices catch. No priest, no sinner has yet been taught our name. Will it thunder up the call of time, or lie quiet as bedrock beneath our feet. Our name, our name, our name, our fraught, fraught name. I'm going to shift gears radically, and yet not, because one of the things that I've been looking for in all of these, historical texts or in the questions that are looking backward is just some kind of lesson that might have to do with compassion. Like, where does it come from? How can we better accept the possibility of it? And I think, like, on the other side of that wish is this sense of, I think we're all connected somehow. I really think we are. And what might it take to live by that suspicion or belief? So I'm going to read you a poem that I wrote after my first trip to China about a year and a half ago, where there was this beautiful sense of belonging that I allowed myself to feel. It's called Eternity, and it's kind of like a little travel log. There are different sections. Eternity. Landscape painting. It is as if I can almost still remember, as if I once perhaps belonged here. The mountains a deep, heavy green, and the rocky, steep drop to the waters below. The peaked roofs, the white plastered brick, a clothesline in a neighbor's yard made of sticks, the stone path skimming the ridge, a ladder asleep against a house. What is the soul allowed to keep? Every birth, every small gift, every ache. I know I have knelt just here, torn apart by loss, lazed on this grass, counting joys like trees. Cypress, blue fir, dogwood, cherry. Ageless, constant, growing down into earth and up into history. Lama Temple. It was a shock to be allowed in, for once not held back by a painted iron fence, and to take it in with just my eyes. No photos signs were discreet, yet emphatic. Coins, bills on a tray. 2 women and then a man bowed before a statue to pray. Outside, above the gates, a sprung balloon and 3 kites swam east on a high, fast current, and something about a bird flapping hard as it crossed my line of sight. The bliss it seemed to make and ride without ever once gliding or slowing. The picture of it meant suddenly youth, and I couldn't help it. I had to look away. Nan Luo Guxiang Ali. Every chance I get, every face I see, I find myself searching for a glimpse of myself, my daughter, my sons. More often, I find there former students, old lovers, friends I knew once and had until now forgotten. My sisters, a Russian neighbor, a red-haired American actor, and on, uncannily, as though all of us must be buried deep within each other. Songshuang Art Village. You pull canvases from racks, red daisies, peonies in a blue vase, an urn of lilies, like spirits flown from the dead. A self-portrait in a white dress, faceless but for one eye, and all around you, what could be empty coffins or guitar cases or dark leaves on a swirling sea. On a column in a black frame hangs a photo of your mother, a smiling girl in an army coat. Can any of us save ourselves, you once wrote, save another. Below her, all beard practically and crevassed brow, Tolstoy stares in the direction of what once must have seemed the future. Mu Tianyu, Great Wall. Farther ahead, another tourist loses his footing and grabs hold of a brick, which comes off in his hands, crumbles where it lands. I always say that poems allow or urge us to be our best selves, our most rigorous and thoughtful and empathetic and resourceful selves. And then there comes a time when you turn off the desk lamp and close the laptop, and then you go back out to being the real you. So I'll read you, lest you think I am a spiritual being, I will read you some down and dirty poems about just being a person in the world. I think of these as companion poems. This one is called Beatific. I watch him bob across the intersection, squat legs bowed in black sweatpants. I watch him smile at nobody, at our traffic stopped to accommodate his slow going. His arms churn the air. His comic jog carries him nowhere. But it is as if he hears a voice in our idling engines, calling him live, swift, prince of creation. Every least leaf shivers in the sun while we sit, bothered, late, captive to this thing commanding, wait for this man, wait for him. Charity. She is like a squat old machine, off kilter, but still chugging along the uphill stretch of sidewalk on Harrison Street, handbag slung crosswise and, I'm guessing, heavy. And oh, the set of her face, her brows profound tracks, her mouth cinched, lips pressed flat. Watching her bend forward to tussle with gravity, watching the birth she allows each foot, as if one is not on civil terms with the other, watching her shoulders braced as if lashed by step after step after step, and her eyes' determination not to shift or blink or rise. I think, I am you, one day out of 5, tired, empty, hating what I carry, but afraid to lay it down, stingy, angry, doing violence to others by the sheer freight of my gloom, halfway home, wanting to stop, to quit, but keeping going mostly out of spite. Maybe I'll close with the last poem in the book, which is called An Old Story, and it's I think it was my attempt to write a new myth. So you hear titles, beatific, and there are other kind of like overtly biblical titles in this book, thinking about a lot of the myth of America comes from that source material. And I wanted to challenge myself to write a forward-looking myth that might be useful today. So this is what I came up with. And I would invite all of the writers in the audience to do the same thing. This is called An Old Story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate swollen to a kind of epic wind. Livid the land and ravaged, like a rageful dream, the worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke. And then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals, long believed gone, crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color. Thank you.
Tracy has generously decided to accept some questions. Do I have two interns with microphones? Ladies? Ladies who are behind the closed doors? So start thinking of your questions. Students, you can save your questions for the morning. So in the midst of this awkward silence, I will now sing All That Jazz. Yeah, so much jazz. All right, looks like we got a microphone. Thank you, David, for helping out. I believe we had one down front.
Hi, Tracy. My name is Mike Matesic. I'm a teacher at Academy Prep Center of Tampa. It's a middle school here. And we have one of our, not just our best students, but you were talking about compassion, one of our most compassionate and enthusiastic students here, Manny Luva, and he wants to ask you a couple quick questions.
Okay, hi.
Hello. What emotions or ideas made you write your poems?
I usually write poems because I have a question. I feel anxious about something, or I feel confused about something. And for me, writing a poem allows me to slow things down and look in the ways it's hard to look in real life, and to sort of stop and go back and look again and build a set of possibilities or just a set of ideas about what's going on. Even if I never get to the bottom of it, I feel like I've gotten a little bit more certainty. I've at the very least developed a sense of some of the complexities at play in the things that concern me. And so that's what where I start. And then sometimes there are things that are experiences I've had that have been moving, wonderful, that I want to go back to and explore in the same way. And poems help me do that too. And
do you have any creative advice for kids like me?
You seem on it. I think you're probably doing great. But I think that when I realized I didn't have to solve things in my poems and I didn't have to have like morals or messages, I could just move around observing and listening to language in different ways, I got really excited, especially when I realized, oh, I can actually ask a question in a poem and I don't have to answer it. Merely by asking it, I've shared it now with the reader and we can dwell on it together in our own way. And so those were things that made the writing of poems feel less onerous and just kind of more exciting. Thanks.
His third question is, what does onerous mean?
We've got another one down in front on this side.
I just wonder, who would you say are your key literary
More and more I find myself wanting to hear from Lucille Clifton, who was mighty and remains mighty, and whose work I think is just so large, you know, and cosmic, and also earth-bound in a really beautiful way. So that's a voice I love. I also love Elizabeth Bishop a great deal. And her poems, you know, I first loved them because she's so good at describing things, and then I came to realize she's describing things so that this other feeling might have a space to kind of emerge from within, because there's so much that's unsettled and unanswered in her poems. And so as I get older, I value that. And there are a lot of other poets. I love Marie Howe. I love Kevin Young. Yeah, those are just some. Mm-hmm. You're clapping for questions.
We're not quite done. We've got another one on this side. Noah, why don't you come around? The other mic seems to be default. It was all going so well.
Can you tell us what you're working on now? Poetry? More prose? More autobiography?
I'm working on two things. I'm working on the trip to China that I kind of went through in that poem was to visit a poet whose work I am co-translating. I don't speak Chinese, but I'm working with a Chinese speaker to translate the poems of Yi Lei, and that will come out in a couple years. And I'm working on a libretto for an opera that is thinking about land ownership, particularly land that was purchased by freed blacks during Reconstruction, and that in many cases remains within the same family lines, but that's highly sought after by developers. So.
Another one on that side. Two on that side.
What do you do when you're researching during your work and you find some piece of research that sort of blows up what you're doing? Like, how do you piece it back together, I guess?
I usually just let it stay blown up, I think. Kind of like what was going to be the Thomas Jefferson poem that became, I think, a better poem because I said, forget about my little plan. I'm always excited when there's something that forces me to have to stop doing what I think I should be doing, and that says, here's a really great alternate route that is right here. And I'm grateful for that usually. Sometimes it takes me a little while to realize that because I feel like, I'm losing something. But I tell myself that I write because I like those moments where I discover things that I hadn't been anticipating. And so those are big moments, when something blows up, when one path gets shut down, and I have to kind of find my way to another. Those are moments of discovery. So I try and just let them happen. And the other stuff can also have a life. I always tell my students, don't delete anything. Even if you've written a poem and it's just bad, but there's maybe one stanza that can serve as an organ donor for a viable poem. So I just hold on to that other stuff.
As Poet Laureate of the United States, you had said that one of your missions was to go into smaller towns and communities that don't necessarily have a large literary kind of culture. As a director of a nonprofit that has some of that same kind of mission, could you talk a little bit about your experiences in some of those towns that didn't have like a lot of literary culture, and what perhaps people in cities that do have a large literary culture can do to kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's been really exciting. It's felt very human. I come to a place and I have been going on these trips that are organized by the Library of Congress and then some of their affiliates to churches or libraries or community centers, or I went to a rehab facility. And so it's not, there's the wish to have a kind of conversation. And I'll read some of my poems and poems by other poets, and I always say, the most interesting thing you can say is whatever it is that you notice. What do you notice? What does this poem make you think of? What does it remind you of? And we just have a conversation, and it's so exciting to do that, to say, I am from one place and you're from another. It seems like we shouldn't have very much in common, and yet we can both find something in this one poem that allows us to open up in a way that is real, and it's not labored with posturing. There's no there's nothing that I'm actually hoping you will or won't say. I'm just, listening, and I feel that very much has been the response of people who have come out. Some people are in towns that are so small where anything that's happening is a reason to go out, even if they don't care about poetry. So it's been really interesting. And then all of the funny things, I don't even know how to tell this story. I visited a place and I read from Wade in the Water, and I was in Kentucky, and a white woman came up to me and she said, I feel like I know this history that you're writing about, and I just want to share with you some stories from my family. And she said, my grandmother lived to be 104, and she used to always tell us she would recite these old rhymes and poems for us, and I recorded her. I'm going to go home and get this CD and bring it to you. And she went home, and she came back a little while later, and she had this really apologetic look on her face. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, I remembered that my grandmother was a really loving person. She would never want to hurt you. But I remembered some of the poems that she's reciting have, some terms in them that are going to be offensive, and I don't want you to think she's a bad person. And that moment of we're both there, we're both feeling, a sense of vulnerability, a little bit of anxiety, and there was something so beautiful about that. I didn't want to shut down and get angry. That's one reaction. But I valued that this woman wanted to open herself up and say, there's this thing in here that I can only apologize for, but can we still have what we just had a few minutes ago? And I don't know, those kinds of experiences, there are many ways of responding to them, but I feel like it's been really beautiful in a way to sort of try and think of what it means to be different people and want to come together, and what the work that entails might feel like, and how we can do it humbly and kind of nicely or something. So that's been really special. I got away from literature with that answer, but it was, that's something I might want to write about at some point.
One last question. Anyone? How to choose? No one is closest to the woman in the back, so.
Hi, I teach in Bloomington, Indiana, but I guess I just wondered, just from your experience so far as Poet Laureate, what would you say about the state of poetry? I mean, right now in our nation. I mean, I know that's a huge question, but I feel like there's something that poetry does that nothing else can do. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's a broad question, but just kind of what your perspective is from what you've seen.
Mm-hmm. When I look at students who are reading and performing and reciting poems, and when I go places where people who don't really have a life in poetry have so much insight to bring to poems that I've loved for a long time, and when I think about how useful poems can be in talking about difficult topics with my children, with my students, with strangers, I feel really excited, not even to mention when I read all of these new young voices in poetry and delight in how distinct and different and courageous and beautifully crafted in all of these different ways, how diverse all of that is. I get excited, and I think poetry is, it's in a really great place, and it's perfectly poised to build something that desperately needs to be built. And that helps me not be so bothered by the question that often comes up by people and maybe it's an obligatory question, but it's like, well, does poetry matter? Many people are bored or alienated by poetry. And I think of all this other like flourishing that makes that question feel less and less necessary. So I'm excited.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.